Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a pleasure to be present at the 8th Smart City Expo and to see the large interest from all of you that have joined us this afternoon on this very important session on mainstreaming urban resilience in our cities in India. This session is being supported by the European Union, which is an urban sector partner to this conference. And I am the team leader of the EU-funded project called the India-EU Urban Partnership, where we are working with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the states and cities in India on mainstreaming resilience in our planning. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, today we have about 53 million plus cities in India, and I have, of course, with me Mr. Srinivas, who will talk more about that. But these cities are now being designated as metropolitans. Cities in India, as across the world, are growing rapidly. And we need to have the right infrastructure in place to plan for any contingencies. In fact, this starts at the planning process. If we are talking about this now, I think we are still reacting to emergencies. But we need to now change the approach and start thinking right from the beginning the importance of having resilient planning in all the plans that we do. So today we have just about an hour, so I'm not going to talk much because I have all the experts here today. We have a very diverse panel, so we have a mix of practitioners as well as policymakers, both from India as well as the European Union. And we will be basically picking their brains and sharing thoughts on three main aspects. So one is, of course, when we talk about planning, we now have all heard, and by now we are all clear that the planning needs to be at an integrated level. With the variety of stakeholders, with the variety of interests, different sectors, different agencies, we need to make sure that when we put up a plan, it has all the inputs and considerations from the various elements of the city or the region. So integrated planning is, of course, important, but to take that further, how do you make sure that decentralized planning is also integrated? So to make sure that the concepts of integration are actually going down to the lowest levels when it comes to implementing solutions on the ground. The second aspect that we should talk about is our learnings from something like the COVID, because the COVID pandemic was something that caught the whole world basically off guard. Have we learned lessons from this situation? How are we taking forward these lessons, and how can we improve so that going ahead in the future we are more proactive in our thinking? And finally, a lot of us, especially in India and maybe all over the world, also are having this classical debate about technology versus nature-based solutions. So what is the balance that we should strive? Of course, I think we all agree that it is not an either-or situation. We need technology, but as well we have a lot of nature-based solutions that we should not ignore. So these are going to be the three aspects that we will talk in our discussion. And then, of course, I would request that we have this as an interactive session. So we don't want, and the panelists and all of us, we did have a bit of a talk in the coffee table, around the coffee table, and we agreed that it should be interactive. So please feel free to join in and raise your hands, give your views, and put the panelists under the spotlight. So I will start with Sriparna first, because I believe in ladies first. And Sriparna has already been introduced by the master of the ceremony. So Sriparna, let us share your thoughts on the three elements of urban resilience that we just talked about. So yes, over to you.
Thank you, Neelabh. This is an extremely interesting topic, and as a practitioner and a student of urban planning all my life, I believe that the time has now come when we really look at the way in which we plan our cities. We look at the guidelines, we look at the regulations that are in place. We still believe that master plans are the answer to everything. And a master planning exercise is like once in 20 years you do a plan, and then every city then does their own plans for various activities, whether it's a mobility plan, whether they are different engineering plans. But unfortunately, none of these plans talk to each other. And so the master plan just remains as a land use plan, and then everything is expected that everything will fall in place because you're doing at city level, you're doing a whole lot of other planning. So while we really need to see what is the best way, and I think Mr. Srinivas, Mr. Jain are better placed than me to respond to this question as to how do we really get plans to talk to each other. Another very important aspect that I'd like to touch upon is the fact that we talk about resilience, we talk about sustainability when we are talking about planning, and we sort of expect that these things will happen naturally. And there are enough and more examples today to show how lack of sufficient attention to climate is really impacting the way that our cities are functioning. We have these big urban floods in Bangalore, in Chennai, which are examples of what can go wrong and what is going wrong because of the way in which we are planning our cities. We also tend to believe that an element, a mark of urbanization or a mark of a good city is a lot of concrete and a lot of glass structures. And, so if you have a city which is visually very appealing from that perspective, you expect that the city functions and it's really a good city to live in. Experience has shown, in all the work that I have been doing across the country, we do sort of give lip service to the fact that our plans need to be inclusive and that we need to do bottom-up planning and that our stakeholders and the poor need to be included in the whole process. But, it does end up as being lip service. But it is good to see that a lot of work is now happening, and I mean, I could give an example of some recent work that has happened in, some of the smaller cities, in the tier 2 cities really, where although this has remained as a research project so far, but it's a good start of how do you actually look at issues of climate change that sort of, impact the poorest more than the others. So there are good handbooks that are coming up. Again, I mean, I'd like to stop with these sort of questions, from people who really make the policies. How do you marry, what the communities need? How do you marry climate into the regulations that are there, that are driving the way in which we are planning our cities?
Thank you very much, Sriparna. It was great to know that since you have been working a lot in the country, that you have acknowledged the fact that tier 2 cities are really championing this, which is really important. And I think it brings a lot of happiness and encouragement to all of us here, right? I think, thanks, that's a great point. So I would now like to request Mr. A.K. Jain to kindly, share his experience and thoughts on the issues that we have just talked about.
Thank you, Neelabh ji, and thank you for getting me here. I think this is a very good to talk with the fellow planners, engineers, and meet many people here. I agree what Sriparna has said broadly, and all my life I have been working on the master plans, on the zonal plans, on the strategic plans as part of the DDA. And this master plan for Delhi 2021, I was personally involved very intimately, very profoundly in this plan. But after 20 years of this, I find that this kind of approach is not going to work in future. The simple reason is that the ideals have changed. The concept of planning or the meaning of planning has changed. And we have to connect, if we have to connect with the present and the future, some of the issues which we are talking now, for example, climate change, resilience, or nature-based solutions, environmental pollution control, etc., were not even heard about 15, 20 years back. So they are now in the front line. And if we are not able to respond to these kind of issues on the, say, climate change or pandemic or health issues, we are not going to do justice with the planning. And why we should carry on with this colonial 20-year planning, why it shouldn't be 5 years? Because of the new technology, I don't think we should prepare plans for 20 years, but if it is for 5 years, there will be some accountability, there will be some relief to the people. Otherwise, there is no responsibility, there is no accountability, and everyone thinks that someone else is going to perform and do the work. Then we are nowadays talking about circular economy. I think this was again not a prevalent concept 20 years back. And the biggest change we have seen is the technology. Now we have on our panel itself the technology like smart cities, the computers, big analytics, and big data. All these kind of things have become indispensable part of the planning system. If we don't take into or take on board these kind of innovations, we are not going to succeed. And this is one complaint I have with my fellow planners, that likewise, like in the software engineers, the discipline, if they are not updating themselves, within 10 years, they are, their shelf life is finished. Why not planners, architects, and engineers? We cannot continue with this kind of old technology, old systems, if we don't embrace the new technology for everything, whether it is the water supply or energy, transportation. So much of revolution. If you see this exhibition itself, it's an eye-opener that the things which we used to conceive 20 years back, 25 years back, are now very obsolete. So this is something which we have to consider very thoroughly, and we have also to look at the aspects of governance, legal system. Government is good in, say, governance, legal systems, regulations, and maybe finance to some extent. The private sector is good in efficiency, introducing new technologies. But if we are talking about public-private partnership, this is not enough. We have to involve the community, the NGOs, for equity, for incorporating the dimension of the gender equity, or women and children, and human rights, the issues of health, etc., which have become very, very important, very significant. And planning has to change from master planning to strategic planning. We identify what are the critical issues of a local area, maybe as you said, the floods in Chennai, or maybe some climate change issues, or heat, urban heat issues, and we have to address those in a very, very systematic and a quick manner, speedy manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jain. I think you raised some very nerve-touching issues here. The fact that, today we have to reinvent the way we learn, actually. Again, you know, it's strange, but we discussed some of these issues even before coming here. We all have learned languages. I'm just taking an example, and we were discussing that traditionally languages were taught in a mathematical manner to all of us. So, for example, we know that when we write English or any other language, it is subject, verb, object. But today's kids, they are learning language on YouTube without learning the semantics, without going through the grammatical process. But still they are grammatically correct. It's because they have a new way of learning, and that's exactly the point that Mr. Jain is making here, that we have to really reinvent ourselves, not for the sake of doing something new, but we have to go back deep in the DNA and find ways of doing things in a completely new manner, because the world we live is super dynamic, basically. So what I will now pass on the floor to Mr. Srinivas, who will of course give us a view as to how ministry is seeing this, because in some sense a lot of the onus falls on him now.
Thank you, Mr. Neelabh, and thank you, organizer for giving me the opportunity to present my views. In the introductory remarks, you mentioned about the metropolitan planning, and also you mentioned about decentralization of, you know, how decentralization can be facilitated through metropolitan planning. So let me tell you, census 2011. As per census 2011, we had 53 million plus cities. But unfortunately, the census figures of 2021 is still not available. Perhaps I think Registrar General of India will be working on, to commence the census 2021. But what we have estimated, there will be 75 million plus cities, sir. Mr. Suresh is here, former CMD HUDCO, and I keep on sharing the latest figures of census. So around 75 million plus cities would be there in 2021. This we have estimated based on, the population of the cities between 5 lakh to 10 lakh. Now, I'll go to the history, sir. The very first National Capital Region Plan, which was prepared in late 1990s, the National Capital Region Plan 2001 actually envisaged decentralization of economic activity. Now, how it is possible? The decentralization will take place once you identify the satellite towns, you identify the growth centers, and accordingly you plan for, providing infrastructure at par with the capital city. So let me also inform you that some of the cities have actually gone for metropolitan region plan. Of course, NCR is the first, regional plan, followed by we have a Mumbai metropolitan region plan, and few cities have also started delineating their metropolitan region like Nagpur, Pune, Chennai. Of course, the latest, the information is that Chennai has expanded its metropolitan region. It's around 5,000 square kilometer. And within 5,000 kilometer, not only you have to ensure planned development of Chennai, but also there are around 7, the local bodies, 7 satellite towns are there, and there are around 100 and plus villages. Now, how you are going to have integrated development? That becomes a big challenge for planners, that how we are going to ensure planned development for the rural areas as well as the satellite towns. Besides Chennai, Nagpur has also attempted to delineate metropolitan region, and Lucknow. And now Lucknow, the state government has initiated to prepare state capital region plan. And the state capital region plan will be prepared on the lines of national capital region plan, and it will go beyond the municipal corporation of Lucknow. The exact area details are not available, but the state government has already initiated, process for inviting the bids for preparing the state capital region plan. Now, let me also, the latest initiative, I think you must have gone through the budget of 2023, 2022. That in 2022, the urban planning, subject was explicitly mentioned for the first time in the history of budget. And as per budget 2022, 6 urban planning reforms have been identified. The modernization of building bylaws. Now let me tell you, Indian cities, they don't, demonstrate a very efficient land use. If you compare with the European cities, Indian cities, if you see the land use distribution, you will have less spaces under the public realm. There will be less, of course, we do have urban and regional development plan formation implementation guidelines, which says that 10 to 14% should be under the public realm. But our cities, somehow, they have not been able to demonstrate the efficient land use. But we are actually making efforts. So one is a modernization of building bylaws, that how cities can modify or amend their building bylaws so as to ensure more spaces under the public realm. Second reform is transit-oriented development. That's very much important because in principle, ministry has already agreed that all million plus cities should go for metro. Now there could be a question that whether metro will be a viable proposition in all the million plus cities. You can see the example of, say, Noida, Greater Noida Metro, Nagpur Metro, where you don't have the 100% occupancy. I mean, hardly 30% of the commuters are actually commuting through metro. But yes, the metro or even BRTS gives lot of scope for transit-oriented development. Now you can have a mixed land use along the transit-oriented corridor. You can also have the provision for housing and also provision for commercial spaces as well as institutional places. Now you will have to see that how proactive cities will be to come up with the TOD policy as well as the TOD regulations along the metro or BRTS corridor. The third important reform is transferable development rights. Now you can see that our million plus cities have seen unprecedented growth, and there are also some examples of million plus cities where there is a lot of urban sprawl. But through TDR, I mean, you'll have to, you can map those areas like from where to where. I mean, from origin to destination. How we can facilitate the transfer of development rights. Now, fourth reform is integration of blue and green infrastructure. What Mr. Neelabh mentioned about the nature-based solution. So, how cities can really ensure integration of blue and green infrastructure? That has become a most challenging task. You might be aware of a Niti Aayog report wherein it has been expressed concern that in by 2031, around 20 cities will run out of water. And that will be a huge challenge. There could be a lot of conflicts due to water shortage. Now the time has come, the cities have to take action with regard to integration of blue and green infrastructure. And in fact, all rivers, even if they are passing through, cities, you need to protect our floodplains. You need to develop biodiversity park. You need to have a networking of water bodies. I think those who are, staying in Delhi for many years, I remember during 70s we used to have 200 plus water bodies in Delhi. Those water bodies have totally vanished, maybe due to unprecedented construction activities. Now, another very important reform is that cities should go for local area plan and town planning scheme, which is basically a bottom-up exercise for what we can say for spatial planning. So you can disaggregate. Sriparna mentioned about the implementation of master plan. Cities, it is very difficult to tell that to what extent the master plan has been implemented. Of course, Maharashtra now recently, Sriparna, they have started quantifying the implementation, like whatever proposals have been envisaged in the master plan and how, to what extent they have been implemented. So that becomes very much important. These are urban planning reforms. Further, I will also elaborate if any.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivas. I think for me personally, it was very interesting to know how the ministry is thinking and the developments that are happening. And with so many new million plus cities and also examples of state capital region coming up. I think it's just a suggestion from my side, but these planning boards should have at least three designations or officials. So one, they should have a chief resilience officer, they should have a chief technology officer, and they should have a chief communications officer. Because in my mind, communication is very important, and I have often interacted with some of the mayors globally, and they say that our biggest challenge is not technology or money. It is making that change, driving that change. So even when you look at, cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen, where they have a lot of their population cycling daily to work, they have a strong communication focus because they have to fight, and it is a fight against the automobile companies. Sorry to my German friend, but if you want your cities to be bicycle friendly, you have to make sure that you are able to compete against the automobile lobby. And therefore, you require strong communications people to convey that message to the citizens. So those were just some of the thoughts, and I will stop here. And now we will shift our focus, let's say, to a more European point of view, and to learn from or to share knowledge about what some of the European companies and experts are experiencing in their part of the world. So I will now pass over to Jacques Beltran, who is the Vice President from Dassault Systems, and they are working in the smart city space using digital twins. So over to you, Jacques.
Neelabh, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me try and address the points you raised, Neelabh, by starting with something I've often been surprised of, which is a paradox. I would say the paradox of cities is that cities, by definition, are a very high concentration of people, material, nature. And so you would think that cities is an obvious and natural playground for all scientists. It's a narrow place where you could actually exert your scientific knowledge and test. And where the paradox is that most of the decisions that are taken in the daily management of cities are not science-based. Impact studies rarely are profoundly science-based. So it's around this paradox that the company I work for, Dassault Systems, is trying to help the management of cities, the operation or the planning of cities. Why? Because we are fundamentally a science-based company. We were born 40 years ago in the aeronautics sector, developing software to help do 3D design of aircraft, for example. And if I take this analogy of aircraft, I think it's interesting again that I was saying yesterday in another panel that you don't do crash tests in the aeronautic industry. You actually certify and validate aircraft based on the virtual twin, on the digital twin of an aircraft. Why is it that when it comes to city management, you do crash tests of public policies? You actually test on the population a policy, whether it's mobility, health, education, and then you adjust, and then there are elections, and you change again. So what we're trying to do is apply to the urban environment the scientific technology that we have developed in the manufacturing sector. So we propose to our customers, cities, that we could, with 3D modeling and 3D simulation, build the virtual twin of a city, and then use this 3D model to test various what-if scenarios. And going to your point about, Neelabh, about resilience, this is a perfect use case for digital twin of cities. You were asking how the COVID crisis, what we've learned of the COVID crisis, and I would like to share with you a couple of examples. First of all, COVID crisis and crisis in general are probably the worst moment you can imagine to try and introduce new technology into public administration. For the simple reason that the public administration is literally running in all directions trying to extinguish fires, and they don't have time, which is natural, to reflect on new technologies, new processes, new way of doing things. Public administration was, during the COVID crisis, very little receptive to whatever new processes, new technology we can bring. However, we did have some local administrations that reacted interestingly, and one of them was Région Grand Est. It's a region in France of 6 million people in the eastern part of France, around the city of Strasbourg. And what the chairman of that region said to us, he called us and said, look, I'm getting data, health data, about the situation in my region from the State Ministry of Health. But that's raw data and I can't do anything with it. Can you help us with that? So what we did was to develop for them a predictive algorithm working with doctors in a very high-level hospital there, research center, epidemiologists. And that algorithm helped this region anticipate how many patients would actually go to intensive care unit 6 months ahead, given the current level of the virus pandemic. This was very useful for hospital just to manage their resources and anticipate what was going to come. So that was the first example of how we used our technology to help local administration. But apart from the COVID crisis, let me give you other examples of how digital twin can help cities become more resilient, more future-proof. For example, currently we're working in the city of Cairo in Egypt on fighting against heat island phenomena. I think very ancient civilizations in India, in Egypt, or in Greece, they knew how to fight against heat islands. They knew about planting trees and putting fountains and pouring water. But this experience, this knowledge has largely been lost, first. And second, we can now, with very advanced technology, bring evidence to the impact of those measures, like vegetation in a city. So that's what we're doing in Cairo today, advising local authority where are the parts of the city where they should plant more trees, what kind of trees, and what impact that's going to have on the felt temperature. And maybe to finish, let me give you a last example. This time we're traveling a lot. We're going to Japan, in Kyoto. The city of Kyoto is prone and looking very closely to flooding risks. And what they want to do is get the population ready to use a citizen mobile app that, when there's a risk of flooding, will help them be geolocalized and will guide them to the right escape route, taking into consideration what the flooding is going to be in the hours to come. Well, in order to do that, they have asked us to build a 3D model of that part of Kyoto and to visualize a flooding model in that 3D referential. And it's based on that digital twin that they actually determine the right escape routes, depending on plenty of factors. And again, we do that on a science-based approach, so that whatever we recommend is rock solid. So to conclude, I would say all this technology, I think, can bring a lot, in particular to local authorities, to what I would say a new generation of political science, in the sense of policy based on science. This is something we can do with technology. It brings objectivity in the decisions. And to come to your very last point, Neelabh, about communication, it's much easier for local politicians to communicate on that kind of decisions if they can show it's an objective science-based decision, not just an idea they had. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jacques. I think some very, very important points illustrated by you, and the fact that we had not only a European perspective, but also how you use technology globally as well was something very interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are writing down your questions, because shortly I will come to you. But before I do that, it's my great pleasure to request Robert Compton, who is from the German Trade and Investment Authority, to share his thoughts about how Germany is, viewing the whole concept or the issue of urbanization. I know you have some really strong powerhouse companies within the space in Germany, including infrastructure companies. So it would be great if you can share your thoughts and perspectives on these issues we've just discussed.
Sure, Neelabh, thank you very much. Just to come back on the point of cars, I won't take it personally, but one of the things that we learned very quickly in Germany in the COVID crisis, one of the first things that happened was in Berlin, people didn't want to travel on the metro, weren't allowed to travel on the metro, and so actually Berlin pioneered taking out car lanes and putting in bike lanes. Most of those have now become permanent, and that's actually a model that was then copied across Europe. So in London they started doing it, in Paris they started doing it, and actually it was it started in Berlin, in the center of Berlin, in one part of the town, and it spread as a model across Europe. Really quickly it became part of the solution to COVID, and I think that's a really good example of something you said at the start. Sometimes the smartest solution is actually right in front of you, and it's not necessarily technological. Sometimes it is about physical infrastructure and making good design decisions. And that links onto something that's very close to my heart, that's building. That's the topic that I work on most at the agency is energy efficiency in buildings. That's where I started, it's where my main expertise is. And there's an agency that supports international companies expanding to Germany. We found that a lot of the solutions that the companies were offering no longer fitted into one silo. And that matches very closely to what we see in the smart city space, that we're talking about mobility, we're talking about logistics, we're talking about energy, we're talking about city planning as well. And so what we did as an agency was to stop working in closed silo teams. We started with the buildings. And if you talk about solutions that are good for the city, and you start with the building, then you very quickly realize that actually if you're going to talk about energy, you need to start looking at the neighborhood. So in Germany, we're talking about heating, so district heating networks. And to go to an integrated planning point at the start, we've now started requiring all communities in Germany to start creating heat maps. So all sources of waste heat are now being put into maps, into databases, so that every planning decision that's made in the future regarding district heat networks as we move away from fossil fuels knows that there's a data center pumping out waste heat over here, knows that there's a factory over here that's producing waste heat, and knows that if we put in a large-scale heat pump by the river here, that's going to be able to feed into that neighborhood planning. We're talking about neighborhood heat storage. And if you start looking at the neighborhood solution, then you start talking about the mobility within that neighborhood as well. And the point I'm trying to make is that every single aspect of one solution in one area automatically links to another. That's where solutions such as those provided by Jacques can be very useful in making those planning decisions. But it's something that we're very much seeing in Germany at the moment, is the idea of integrated city planning. It's certainly something that's coming along, and it's something that we as an agency are very much focused on, and that's why we're here talking to companies, also Indian companies, that often have a digital tool perspective on a physical problem that we're very happy to support, and that's why we have our experts here for digital solutions, as well as myself who works on the more physical side of things.
Super. Thank you very much, Robert. It's also again very interesting that, you know, because of climate change, temperatures in Europe are now rising, and Europe wants to learn from India as to how do you tackle the heat that we have been tackling for so many years, which is also a very interesting development, I think.
Absolutely. In Berlin, in summer, in northern Germany, temperatures well over 40 degrees. Jacques in France will also be able to testify to that the temperatures in Europe have changed rapidly and noticeably within the last 10 years, where we're hitting temperatures over 41, 42 degrees, I think, are hit in Berlin last year. And I know sitting here in India, maybe saying 42 degrees, so what? But 42 degrees in a city that's designed for 25 degrees feels really tough. And so we're absolutely open to listening to solutions from abroad, from those that have been dealing with these problems for a long time. Drought is also an issue that you might not necessarily associate with Europe, but in France there were large issues with drought. Northern Germany is suffering, technically it's suffering a huge drought. And so these are all issues that we're having to adapt to, and cities are at the heart of that. That's where the majority of German citizens live, is in a medium-sized city, not in a large city, not in a tier 1 city, but it's those smaller cities, that's where the majority of people live. And that's where we need the solutions to be able to deal with those problems. Talking about, as Sriparna said earlier, with the green and blue infrastructure, greening facades, conversely, we're also dealing with cloud bursts in summer. So almost tropical style rain bursts that just flood the city within half an hour. Unbelievable amounts of water. These are things that never used to happen in the past, or they were once in a decade sort of situations. They're now happening regularly. And so in Berlin, for example, we've set up a rainwater agency to deal with this sort of issue. And we're talking about every new project that's developed. You have to look at the concept of a sponge city. How are you going to deal with that water that's coming down? How it's going to be stored and then used sensibly. When the time of drought that follows a few months later, or even conversely at the same time if it's in the middle of summer, how that water can then be used efficiently and sensibly. There's a lot of technological solutions there, but there's also a lot of physical, good town planning that's required. And one difference that we have between Germany and India, a huge difference, is that if you talk about net zero targets of 2045, 2050, the majority of buildings that are going to exist in 2050 in Germany, more than 90% of them are already built. They already exist today. Whereas in India, that's not the case. I was given a figure the other day, about 60% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 are built today, is the number I was given. Happily let myself be corrected on that figure. But it means we're really looking at a situation where we're retrofitting cities in Germany. These are cities that were built, parts of them hundreds of years ago, some of them built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and retrofitting into those situations, that's where digital solutions can be a really big help. And that's a slightly different aspect in India, where you're facing massive urbanization, massive growth of the cities, where you're looking for new solutions in new areas as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. So I think at this stage, I would like to pass on the floor to all of you to ask questions. So kindly raise your hand and introduce yourself. And of course, I think there should be a microphone that's going around. And please address your question to Suresh sir. Maybe we can, yes, please. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Sunil Kumar Shinde from Mumbai and Sholapur. Thank you so much. Srinivas sir has been highlighted about few of the cities are running out of water soon. Okay, and in that case, we have say project like river connecting in India. River connecting, like say Bhima and Krishna in Maharashtra, which is pending since long time. That with the help of Dassault technologies, if we can able to prepare the kind of 3D model, we have both the situation that is extreme flooded areas and extreme drought areas. I will give an example about Pune district, very flooded area. At the same time, at the 250 kilometers, we'll find the Sholapur city as very drought area. If we can prepare this with a model which will really solve the issues which is pending since long time, and definitely with this help, we'll come up with a lot of opportunities in India to make the balance of water.
I think that's a very good suggestion.
It's a very good suggestion, especially when you talked about the connecting the rivers. This has to be demonstrated by a case study. So let me also tell you, in fact, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs also came out with the publication called river-centric urban planning, wherein we have actually recommended that the floodplains of the river should be protected. For example, Zone O, it's a Yamuna River zone, in Delhi. I mean, Delhi we have got a 15 planning zone. One of the zone is River Yamuna zone, which is known as Zone O. That has been designated as no construction and no development zone. So this requires, you know, a lot of monitoring. You know, even we have a drone technology, wherein you can monitor the, you know, the development activities along the river. So we at any cost we have to protect our, you know, floodplains. But your suggestion is very well taken. I mean, we need to think about the connecting the rivers in order to ensure that in future we are not facing drought-like situation. Thank you.
Excellent inputs from all the 5 speakers, and of course, well brought in by the moderator. My concern is we are now in 2023. Everybody talks into the 2030, 50, by which net zero carbon is going to be one of the important topics. Excepting for the inputs which I heard from Robert in terms of the heating and related one, I wanted to know how cities are getting geared up to deal with the whole issue of net zero carbon. Net zero carbon is a phenomenal amount of things to be achieved, not only in the building sector, but also transportation sector, the embodied energy of the building materials and construction material, large way to bring the carbon to. That's why India did not agree on 2050. We said we might achieve it 2070. China put it 2060. I wanted to hear from all the 5 planners of cities now here. Is it one of the thought process going in anybody's mind as planners for cities to think of at the city level to have the net zero one, or is it just being a few green buildings to come or a green built environment to come and some other one net zero water or net zero energy or net zero waste, and they were going net zero carbon? So that's my first question. I have one more question to ask. Especially I was very happy to hear from Jacques' input that can really change the whole city planning depending upon the nature of modeling that you can work on, how new solutions can be. And therefore that brings me, you used the word resilience, but I thought, Nikaj, I'll tell, resilience as well as sustainability becomes 2 sides of the coin. Don't put the egg only in the resilience. I talk resilience from the point of all the natural calamities, be it earthquake, you're keeping on seeing regularly, flooding, cyclone, hurricane, literally every day we hear that. And flooding also is another one. The other one is the issues on environmental concerns which are there based on sustainability coming. Sustainability on, as rightly told by you, on the green agenda, the blue agenda, water, all that. So sustainability and resilience are 2 sides of the coin onto which we require all the planners have to think in terms of that. So do they have that futuristic vision to work towards that particular thing, and more so in the context of net zero carbon, which all over the world everybody says it's possible to do? I doubt it. So I want to hear the views on that.
Can I take the one on the carbon? Very relevant question, Mr. Suresh. Right now I'm working on a project which is actually developing a low emission zone in a particular city. It's on a very, very small scale, but at least, it's a start that cities are beginning to think about this. We do hear a lot about EVs, but again, EV infrastructure, states do have EV policies, but again, we are talking about huge behavior change, we are talking about huge infrastructure. So yes, the problem is very serious, but at least now, we can say that there are cities that are talking about it. There are also discussions happening with cities on shared mobility, on using EVs. Cities like Amritsar, for example, they are trying to convert their existing 3-wheelers into EVs and, promoting cooperatives but these are very small initiatives, I agree. And, there's a lot that needs to be done. The second question on, I totally agree that resilience and sustainability, in the run for resilience, we are perhaps forgetting sustainability. One big problem that is there is the absence of data at climate, at local level. So when we want planners, when we want cities to actually do climate resilient planning, or when they want to do climate mainstreaming, we don't have that kind of data. And we are still depending on district level data, which may perhaps not be correct. So that's a huge data gap, and I mean, there are no answers except just to work on this. So I just wanted to respond.
Thank you. Very, very, I think, good questions. And I just want to draw your attention to 3 or 4 recent initiatives of the Government of India. One is Sundar India, Sustainable Urban Network for Dynamic and Resilient India. This is something which tries to connect resilience and zero carbon together. Second is establishment of the climate centers. Delhi already has one under the flagship of NIUA, and other cities are also being encouraged. Then the third very good initiative is Life Mission. When we are talking about environment, climate change, nothing is going to happen because of the master planning or something like this, but the behavior of the people has to change. People have to participate. The next important thing is the need for urban reforms. Mr. Srinivas has mentioned 6 urban reforms like TOD, Blue and Green Network, etc., etc. But the problem is that these reforms are not new. In fact, Master Plan for Delhi 2021 already has everything like TDR, accommodation reservation, land pooling, Blue and Green Network, but it has not happened because we didn't have the proper regulations, identification of the authority who will implement, and standard operating procedures. So unless we have this, we are going to stuck up in the whole existing scenario. The last point I want to make is a very good suggestion given by Neelabh about the Chief Research Officer, Chief Technical Officer, Chief Commercial Officer, Communication Officer. But I think rather than creating new silos, what is required is the changing role of the planners and engineers. Rather than working as professional planners in a watertight compartment, if they can be the agents of change and they can become they can interact with the society, with the people, and that will bring a major change. Thank you.
Neelabh, if I may just take 20 seconds to try and answer your question, at least to illustrate with an example. Going back to the point about the low emission zones. I know it's true in many countries, but in France, 45 major cities by 2026 have the obligation to install low emission zones for car traffic in the city centers, right? But that's decided by law, but the implementation of the decision has proven to be extremely complex because city mayors, city officials are trying to figure out what is going to be the collateral impact of banning the access to the city center for cars or for certain categories of cars. Because if you do that, you may create a low emission zone in the city center, but probably you are by the same token creating a huge traffic jam in the suburbs, which is going to emit as much or even more CO2 emissions that you are trying to avoid in the city center. That kind of decision and that kind of collateral impact can be modeled and simulated in a digital twin. So that's a good news. And some of those cities are moving towards that because they want to have this science-based approach that I was mentioning in my introduction earlier.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions, but you can, of course, grab hold of the panelists after the session. So once again, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a warm hand.